In Ottawa on this Wednesday evening, where in just 30 minutes, Prime Minister Mark Carney is slated to deliver a pre-budget address here in the nation's capital. The speech is aimed at setting the table for Carney's first budget, which last month he promised would be one of both austerity and investment. The Liberals hold a minority of seats in the House of Commons, 3 seats shy of a majority, so they're going to need support from opposition parties to pass that budget. Ahead of tonight's address, the Prime Minister met with the leaders of both the Bloc Québécois and the Conservatives.
Mr. Poilievre this afternoon, Prime Minister, please.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing Leader of the Opposition.
If he takes my suggestions of bringing down the deficit to the level the Liberal government promised, of getting rid of the hidden taxes on food, well, then let's have a look at it.
It's their responsibility and only theirs to find somebody to vote with them. They know our conditions, and if they wake up a little bit late, it's once again their problem.
We're looking for a budget that helps working families. It's got to create jobs. It has to create affordable housing. It has to support and protect health care. We will not support an austerity approach.
The Prime Minister's pre-budget address gets underway just under half an hour from now at 7:30. It's going to take place at the University of Ottawa, which is where we find our senior political correspondent, Mike Couture. He's not behind the podium, but he will be joining us. That's where the speech is going to take place. Mike does join us, rather, from, I think, either just another part of the room or just outside of it. Hey, Mike, good to have you here. I know you've been talking all day with people in and around the Prime Minister about what the purpose of this address is. What have they been telling you about what they hope they accomplish tonight?
Yeah, they really want to speak to a generation that they feel they have not addressed just yet. They feel they've gotten out there, they've spoken to people in the trades, they've certainly talked to a number of different industry as well, but they feel like this 18 to 24 demographic is the one that they haven't addressed just yet. And that is the goal of having this here at the University of Ottawa, making sure that they are communicating to young people exactly what the budget will do for them and how it will help them as well. And you know, that communication side of it, Vassy, is interesting because I spoke to some people in line here and they say they're hoping that other politicians do more of this. They want to hear from them. This is certainly a politically engaged crowd, some of them from the young Liberals of the University of Ottawa, other people who are invited because they know somebody who is working for an MP, and others who happened upon the invite. There was one who is a student in criminology who said really anxious to hear not only about the bail reform that the Carney government is supposed to table tomorrow in Parliament, but also about other policies, specifically sort of talking about how they are graduating from university with a lot of debt, and they want to know what the government is going to do to make sure that there is a job there, not necessarily waiting for them, but that they have any kind of aspiration of a job. So it really is an interesting cross-section of people here, some that are engaged politically, some that are not, but all of them very anxious to hear from the Prime Minister and exactly what his plan is for this demographic.
What are you anticipating, or what have people been telling you about what the Prime Minister is going to say where the budget is concerned? Specifically, we're a few weeks out from it. The messaging from both himself and the rest of government has really evolved from this will be austerity and investment, I think, away from a message around austerity toward investment. They keep saying over the last number of days, generational investment, generational investment. Do we expect that to be more clearly defined in this speech?
Yeah, definitely. And certainly the people that I've been speaking to who have knowledge of this speech really focus on the fact that they are making these announcements of spending leading up to it and the investment behind it. And, you know, those 4 key pillars that we know we are hearing, spending less to invest more, talking about climate as well. We understand that another one of the pillars is going to be all about the plan to attract talent to Canada and also to have a new sort of controlled immigration plan and really trying to sort of set the table for exactly what they want. There was something as well that I had spoken to somebody from somebody who has knowledge of the speech was saying that they really also want to highlight some of those announcements that made, specifically hiring 1,000 new RCMP officers, 1,000 new border agents, making sure that they are telling people exactly where the money is going and how they are spending it, and really shifting it, to your point, as it being more of an investment and we really haven't heard in the last little while, and I don't anticipate we're going to hear it here today at all in terms of that austerity and that part of it that we had heard from Prime Minister Mark Carney when he had talked about the cuts. We certainly haven't heard about any departmental cuts and the 15% of efficiencies that we're looking for. So expect that to be part of it as well, especially, Vassy, when you consider the crowd that he will be talking to. I don't think anybody here wants to hear about austerity. They certainly want to hear about where this government is going and how they're spending the money that is going into the government.
Okay, Mike, I'll leave it on that note. We're going to be checking in with you both before and after the speech. I appreciate it very much. That's our senior political correspondent, Michael Couture, who is on site there at the University of Ottawa, where in about 25 minutes' time, we anticipate the Prime Minister's speech, pre-budget speech, will get underway. Let's do some analysis now of what we can expect and the purpose of tonight's speech. Joining me this evening for that are three of CTV's political analysts. Scott Reid is former communications director to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Former Conservative Industry Minister James Moore is with us. He's now a policy advisor at Edelman. And Kathleen Monk rounds us out. She's former Director of Communications to the late Jack Layton. She's now the principal owner of Monk & Associates. Hi, everybody.
Hey there.
Very nice to see you. Scott, I'm going to start with you. We're 2 weeks out from the budget. The Prime Minister in those 2 weeks will largely be in other places outside of Canada at APAC and ASEAN. Why tonight? Why 30 minutes? Why at the University of Ottawa?
Well, I think a big part of the answer is what you suggested in the question, which is that he's going to be out of the country for the next 9-10 days. So as the discussion and the controversy and the dialogue around the budget begins, he's not going to be present. So I think he wants to plant his flag. I think he wants to define the terms of how that discussion will unfold between now and budget day. And obviously, they're signaling that they want to talk about generational change. I'll be watching for a couple of things. Like, if they're going to speak to young Canadians, then it must be backed up by not just in an argument, but announcements. There must be some specific measures that really speak to and register with younger Canadians. So will that be around housing? I think if it's talking about, putting more cops on the streets or immigration, some of the things we were just hearing from Mike, I mean, those may be broad themes, they may be things they try to recapture in the speech. But you don't call this audience together of 20-year-olds at the University of Ottawa and then talk to them about, the broad strokes of a talent strategy to recruit people from around the world. You've got to say something specific to them. I'm thinking housing. I'll also be watching to see what they have to say around the deficit, because this is going to be a big number, and they're going to have to start to put some context on it. Does the Prime Minister do that job himself and kick that war off, or does he leave it to others?
Does a speech like this offer the opportunity, James, to shape a narrative around the budget, or has the opportunity passed them by? And I ask because 6 weeks ago it was austerity and investment. There's been a lot less mention of austerity over the past few weeks, and some pushback from opposition parties about what this budget might actually be or not be. Like, is this an opportunity to inform that narrative, or is it too late?
It's pick a lane time. We will remember, of course, that the budget was punted back a month up to the current date in the first week of November. And the Prime Minister and the government has a lot more data in front of them to assess the direction it is that they think the country needs to go and the way that they want to go politically. We've had the Bank of Canada register their basis, quarter-point basis cut. We've had the Parliamentary Budget Officer give an assessment of where they assess the budget deficit will be. We've had some provincial governments put forward some budgets. We've had an election in Newfoundland and Labrador. We've had Danielle Smith and other provinces react to their first tranche of major projects. We have the next tranche coming in about a month and a half's time. So they're kind of in a window here where it's time to pick a lane. And the scale of the deficit is one thing, but I think they also need to keep their eye trained on something which is really important, which is the strength of the Canadian economy to put out the kind of economic strength necessary to collect the revenues that are necessary to fund the kind of social programs that people are being more and more dependent on. So it's not just a question of how much are the revenues and what's the spending and what's the deficit threshold, but how is the engine underneath the hood doing in terms of its capacity to sustain the level of weight of debt that we have in this country. Last year, we spent $54 billion $54 billion just to service the national debt. That's the cost of the national public broadcaster about every 6 days. So, you know, we're on a track here that is utterly unsustainable. And I think people are going to be wanting to know where the Prime Minister's at in terms of his framing of our entire fiscal situation. And he now has time here to sort of set the pathway towards his budget in a couple of weeks' time. And we're looking for some clarity, some consistency, and frankly, some honesty.
What do you think they hope to accomplish, Kathleen, tonight with this?
I mean, listen, this is the first report card that we're going to get on Prime Minister Carney when he delivers the budget in 2 weeks. So he has to start understanding that it's not just going to be about the numbers that come out on November 4th, but also about the narrative. And I think the party has been on its back foot and not putting that narrative out so far. So this is what the start of, hopefully, the speech tonight is going to be, like kind of trying to lay out what their story is. Because we've seen the story from the PBO. We've seen the story from the C.D. Howe Institute and other bank analysts in terms of what they're saying about the deficit. We've seen how the opposition has been laser focused on that deficit number, right? That's all they care about. They have been basically setting up a pre-buttal against Carney since his decision to kind of separate the budget into both a capital and an operating budget. Basically, he wants to separate, you know, the family mortgage from the family grocery bill. But if he doesn't tell the story around that, the opposition will actually back him into a corner and just focus on that large deficit number, as you saw James just really effectively saying, right? They just want to focus on that one big number of the deficit. And so Carney's got to get ahead of that. He's got to start telling that story if he wants to, and what the investments are going to be. But like Scott, I wonder, you know, what is he going to say to this youthful audience? They're experiencing incredible unemployment, outrageously high tuition fees, a housing market that is just impenetrable. The anxiety that this generation is facing right now because of the housing crisis, the lack of things like, you know, lifetime employment or defined benefit pension plans, or even a healthcare system that works anymore. They're feeling a lot of that anxiety. So what is he going to say to them? And is it going to be enough? You know, we have lots of ideas floating out there, ideas like the youth environmental, youth corps. Will that come out tonight? Is that going to be the job strategy? I don't think saying we're going to hire a bunch more RCMP or border guards is really going to sell it to the audience, the university audience at the University of Ottawa tonight. But I don't know. What I'm struck by is Carney has made a big throw to try to kind of modernize how our governments approach our fiscal plans, right? Changing the dates of the budget, how we're rolling them out, this idea of a capital and operating budget. And the job of the opposition is simply to burn up that playbook before he even gets to table it. And so far, they've been winning. So this job tonight is basically to kind of make sure they put a narrative marker down on what they want the budget to be.
What do you think, or how do you think, Scott, the meetings that took place, for example, today between the leader of the Conservatives, Pierre Poilievre, and the Prime Minister, as well as the leader of the Bloc, François Blanchet, and the Prime Minister, how does that factor into what they're hoping to accomplish from a narrative perspective?
Not much. I think that they probably factor into the vote. I think they probably factor into what the practical realities of House management are going to be. But in terms of the broad storyline that gets communicated to Canadians, I don't think it paused Pierre Poilievre for 1 second. I don't think it paused, judging by the clips we saw a minute ago, I don't think it paused Blanchet 1 second. I don't think it's going to have a whole hell of a lot to do with what the Prime Minister says in his speech today. And I want to go back to something and, like, let's get real. What is the absolute magnetic north of our reality right now? It's Donald Trump. So when we talk about the deficit, we talk about $54 billion, of servicing the debt on a per annum basis. Even if we talk about this crowd tonight and speaking about generational fairness and what announcements might or might not be made, the big thing is the big thing. And the big thing is Donald Trump. He's destroying everything we know about our trading relationship with the United States, the largest market in the world, with others. It's remaking everything on the fly. And so from my perspective, when we talk about the deficit, I don't think it is so much about preconditioning what the deficit number is going to be, but why it's going to be that way. And making certain that politically you are ascribing the blame for the deficit on Donald Trump and the need to protect industry and workers and how you're doing that and why you're spending. And forget the talk of austerity. You've got to pick a lane, as James says, but pick a lane in terms of saying why you're doing the things you're doing, why you must run a deficit, why you must make these investments, why they make sense not just for now, but maybe for the generation to come in terms of the Ottawa U students, But it isn't just what, it's why, and it's got to be anchored in Trump. Trump is the monster of this monster movie, and you've got to make full political advantage of him.
James, what do you think about that?
Yes and no. Yes, I agree with Scott. That'll be his narrative, and I think it's important. Look, this is, as I said, we're still more than 3 years left on the Donald Trump as president calendar, and it's a relationship that needs to be nuanced and dealt with responsibly and effectively and all that. However, Donald Trump was president of the United States from January of 17 to January of 2021, and now he's been president for 1 year. But all the accumulated deficits were voluntary by Canada. The deficits and the fiscal situation and the soup that we're in right now are not because of Donald Trump. Where we have to go will be in part, of course, in reaction to the existential threat that Donald Trump threatens to our export-based economy, for sure. However, the fiscal crunch that we're in right now, on the cusp of $100 billion perhaps deficits, that's our own making. It was, it has been the past decade of saying, like, people on vacation, put it on the credit card, we'll figure it out later. Put it on the credit card, we'll figure it out later. You can only do that for so long, and eventually the bill comes. And now, as I said, we're close to $60 billion per year in the cost of servicing the deficit. And so, we can blame Donald Trump and the need of and the threat of Donald Trump for our forward actions. Fine, but the limited scope of our actions and the inability for us to have a tax competitive economy is because we've basically blown the last 10 years on endless deficits that we can't afford, because frankly we've had minority parliaments that have been all about short-term politics as opposed to generational responsibility. And here we are now with a minority parliament, only a few seats, but still a minority parliament, and I'm hopeful. And I'm genuinely hopeful that the Prime Minister has a vision for the country that goes beyond the next confidence vote, because that's what this country needs. And part of what Scott says, we have a generational threat here, and Donald Trump going forward. We've blown the last decade, and I'm hopeful that there is some kind of vision here that is not red team, blue team, orange team, but it's actually Team Canada, and it has some substance to it to make us more competitive going forward, because we've blown the last decade.
Last word to you, Kathleen. I'll take a break, and you guys will stick around.
Yeah, I mean, budgets are always about choices, right? That's what everyone always says. And I think that the problem right now that Carney faces is he has both, yes, an expenditure problem, but he also has a revenue problem. I mean, he has walked back many opportunities to actually bring more revenue into the government coffer. So some of the fiscal challenges he's facing are made by himself, right? He walked back the DST, the digital services tax. He abandoned the global minimum tax. He abandoned the capital gains tax, right, which would have brought $20 billion in over 5 years and only affect a small portion of the population. So, I mean, some of the mess that he's in terms of the fiscal mess and just the fiscal envelope that he has to work with is of his own doing as well.
Okay, we're going to take a quick commercial break. That speech from the Prime Minister to set the table ahead of the federal budget gets underway at 7:30 Eastern. We'll carry it live. I'll take a quick commercial break. The Strats are sticking around, and Nick Nanos will join us after that break. Stay right there.
Hi-ho, Ontario! DraftKings has everything you've been hunting for in one casino app.
I was grateful for the chance to sit down with the Prime Minister. We had a good conversation. He didn't make any commitments, and so I'm looking forward to seeing what he comes up with.
Do you get the sense that this is a budget you could support?
I haven't seen anything, so, but I've sort of laid out my conditions for the party, and we'll see what he comes up with.
That's the leader of the federal Conservatives, Pierre Poilievre, emerging from a pre-budget meeting with Prime Minister Mark Carney. That meeting lasted about 30 minutes, and it came just before an address from the Prime Minister that is now just under 10 minutes away. I'll show you a live look here at the stage where that speech is going to take place. That's at the University of Ottawa. The crowd, we are told, is made up at least in part of a number of students. To get some more perspective on political positioning ahead of the budget, I'm joined live now by Nick Nanos. He's the founder and chief data scientist at Nanos Research. Nick, it's a pleasure to see you as always. Thanks for making the time.
Great to see you.
So let's start out with where everyone sits ahead of this budget, because the past 48 hours, there's been tons of political posturing. Could there be, might there be, should there be an election over the budget? Because, of course, the minority Liberals do need some support from the opposition. So where is the governing party sitting from a public opinion perspective versus opposition parties?
You know, it's interesting, Vassy, when we look at the latest Nanos tracking, it's a statistical coin toss between the Liberals and the Conservatives. They are both within the margin of error of the weekly tracking, so it's a very tight race between the two parties. The interesting thing is that the Liberals do well among voters that are over 50. The Conservatives do better among voters that are under 50. Might explain, Vassy, why Mark Carney is talking to students, because, you know, the Liberals are trailing among younger Canadians who are feeling crushed trying to pay for food and groceries and for housing.
Yeah, Mike Lecouture, my colleague at the beginning of the show, was saying that people in and around the Prime Minister were saying to him, conceding that they hadn't spent a lot of time talking to people in this age demographic or in this demographic more largely. Why do you think that they have failed to land with their messaging in both the election and since with this group?
I think a lot of it has to do with how effective the Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre have been at focusing on pocketbook issues, you know, the rising cost of food and groceries, the cost of housing. Pierre Poilievre was first on this issue when Justin Trudeau was leading the Liberal Party. And, you know, the Conservatives own that as part of their brand. You know, what's clear, at least for the Liberals, is that if they want to have an advantage, that they have to do better among young voters. And, you know, the thing is for the Conservatives, it's kind of like the flip side of that. They have to somehow connect with voters that are over 50 years of age who really right now prefer Mark Carney over Pierre Poilievre.
So when we talked just over a month ago, let's say, or after the summer, the Liberals still had a pretty sizable lead over the Conservatives. What you just showed us a few moments ago was a real tightening of the race between the two parties. What do you attribute to that?
I think basically the honeymoon's over. You know, the Canadians in the last election, for a significant portion, they were willing to give the Liberals a try. You know, the fact of the matter is that going into the election earlier this year, that the Liberals were dead. It looked like they were finished. And Mark Carney managed to kind of turn that ship around and create those new opportunities. I think fast forward now, Canadians are starting to get impatient. Perhaps they like what they hear from Mark Carney, but what they want to see is action. And, you know, the further that we get into 2025, and if we hit 2026 without concrete action or kind of gains on a lot of these promises that Mark Carney has made, it's going to make for a very ugly 2026. And I think what Mark Carney is trying to do to get ahead of that when it comes to the political environment.
I wanted to also ask you about, given what you see in the field right now, if you think the budget will be politically significant, and for whom?
I think actually the budget's going to be politically significant for both Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre. For Mark Carney, he's probably going to be using it as an opportunity to define his vision and how he's going to move forward, because he's battling what I'll call the drip, drip, drip of negative news of jobs moving from Canada to the United States, and he needs to try to sound proactive. For Pierre Poilievre, the interesting thing about him is how far will he go to put pressure on the Liberals? How will he critique beyond kind of saying that the deficit is too large? What will be his focus in terms of his counter vision? Because it's not enough for Pierre Poilievre just to tear down the Liberals. He's got to present an alternative, because, Vassy, when we look at the tracking numbers, the Liberals and Conservatives are a coin toss. However, Pierre Poilievre is trailing Mark Carney by a whopping 20 percentage points when we ask Canadians who they prefer as Prime Minister.
What does that tell you about, and I know it's a bit of political fantasy, but at the same time it is possible, and certainly there was a lot of back and forth in the House of Commons over the past 2 days about it. If this budget were to force an election, how competitive would it be?
Well, I think right out of the gate, it would be extremely competitive between the two parties. The big question is I think what the election's usually about is personalities, leadership politics. And, the thing is this is where, the big question is for Pierre Poilievre, is there enough time for him to turn his personal brand around to be more competitive with Mark Carney? Because if Pierre Poilievre becomes more competitive with Mark Carney, it's a complete game changer for the Conservatives. But right now, Pierre Poilievre doesn't have a lot of political coattails in terms of his personal brand. And Mark Carney, when it comes to personality and kind of his leadership, at least, has the advantage. But you know what? People still don't like the Liberals. They're unhappy with the last 10 years. So it should be a cautionary tale for Mark Carney and the Liberals right now.
Okay, Nick, I'll leave it there. Thanks so much for your analysis. Appreciate it as always.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Nick Nanos is the founder and chief data scientist at Nanos Research. We're just a few minutes away from that speech from the Prime Minister, if, of course, it gets underway on time. I'm back with Scott Reed, Kathleen Monk, and James Moore to talk a little bit about the potential political significance. Kathleen, Nick lays out a very interesting thing that's happened over the last 6 weeks in the narrowing at the party level of polling between the Conservatives and the Liberals. How important, we're expecting the Prime Minister to set the stage for the budget. How important politically do you think this budget will be?
I think it's really important. It is a minority. It's, minority math plays into this. He's got to get the confidence not only of the House, but of Canadians, right? I think that Nick's point about how the Liberals really rode into power for this time, just in the spring, was on that older demographic, right? And that younger demographic so dramatically swung to the Conservatives. And it's because what I was saying earlier on the show, it's the anxiety. It's they're disaffected. They feel that there's not much of a future, right? And then we're seeing that play out even in terms of their own employment, with the employment numbers being so low for that group between 18 and 34, really. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done. And I'm not sure what I'm seeing, or hearing reports coming out of what could be in the speech tonight, if in fact there's really anything juicy that the youth group could actually, demographic, could latch onto.
Scott, do you think the budget politically is a big deal?
Well, sure. Because it's a platform, because it's one of the 2 or 3 times a year, other than when you sit next to Donald Trump in the Oval Office, or you have a throne speech that you can punch through and capture people's attention and give them some sense of who you are, what you're about, and what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. But, from my perspective, what I take away from what Nick said, the advice that I would send to the political parties is, now is the time to fix your problems. There's bad news in this poll, in his polling, for both parties. So if you're the Liberals, you say, all right, how do we concentrate our story? How do we make certain that people feel that we are focused on the priorities that matter most to them, that there's no sense of drift on that we don't get into governmentitis, we don't get into a rut and a rhythm that's disconnected from regular voters? I don't think this budget's going to trigger an election. So use this time to fix that problem, because your party numbers are essentially tied. And if you're the Conservatives, even more urgent, even more important, you got to fix that leadership gap. People don't become convinced that Pierre Poilievre has what it takes to be Prime Minister. If he continues to trail Mark Carney by 20 points on a personal approval as who do I think has the stuff to lead the country, that happens whether there's an election in 2 weeks because of this budget or 2 years because of the life of the parliament gets extinguished, he's in deep trouble. They've got to fix that problem. So I look at those polling numbers, and I look at this budget, and I say this is an opportunity for either of those leaders to try to fix what's wrong with them. One has to fix a leadership issue. One has to fix a priority and narratives issue.
Any moment now, the Prime Minister is set to take the stage at the University of Ottawa to deliver a pre-budget address. We're just waiting there. James, your thoughts on the political significance of, potentially, of the budget for both the government and opposition parties?
so far, legislatively, it's been relatively small ball. Although Bill C5, the infrastructure bill, is important and has consequence. The bail reform is important, has consequence. This is watershed. This is a big deal, and there's such hype and expectations around this budget, what it'll mean. I anticipate the speech tonight will have a tremendous amount of detail, actually, and I think he'll put down some markers. I think he'll set a tone, and I think there's going to be a bit of a gauntlet thrown down to the opposition parties: either get on board, get out of the way, or get ready for an election.
Kathleen, the speech is, I think, long. Probably,
yes.
Yeah, probably something in the neighborhood of half an hour. It's the Prime Minister giving an address at this time. But what kind of detail do you anticipate? Like, how do you make that a 30-minute speech punch through, if in fact that's the purpose you hope it serves?
You don't. There's no. Listen, James has given many speeches. Scott and I have trained people and written many speeches in our lives for political leaders. Like, our advice generally is 7 minutes, max 12. So if we're hitting 30 minutes, I mean, there's got to be some content in it that's worthwhile.
We'll start the countdown because here is the Prime Minister.
Here we go.
Let's listen in live.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Merci, Madame Fortier. Merci,
Thank you, Ms. Fortier.
Merci, Madame
Thank you, dear Mona.
C'est un grand plaisir.
Thank you, Madam President.
Good evening.
It's a great pleasure to be here this evening.
Look, it's been a while since I was in your shoes at university. It's been a long while, actually. It's been a long while, but one of the things is that there are some similarities to our experiences, okay? Trust me, I'm going to draw them out. The fact is, in particular, we will have both studied and entered the workforce. You will soon enter the workforce during times of immense change, okay? And I've learned a few things since I graduated, and I've increasingly understood this point that, life doesn't proceed in a straight line. And that the history and the progress of nations are punctuated by hinge moments. Times when the future literally hangs in the balance and when our actions can be decisive. Et dans des moments comme celui-ci,
in a moment such as this,
nous devons être audacieux.
We need to be bold.
Il faut tracer une nouvelle voie.
We need to forge a new path.
Le faire ensemble.
And we need to do that together.
Le Canada traverse un moment.
Canada is going through one of those times today.
Changement technologique s'accélère.
Technological changes are happening ever faster.
The U.S., as we all know, has fundamentally changed its approach to trade. It's raising its tariffs to levels last seen during the Great Depression. And the scale and the speed of these developments are not part of a smooth transition, they're a rupture. And they mean that our economic strategy needs to change dramatically. And they mean as well, even though we both lived through time, or I lived through times of immense change, your future will not be the same as my past. Because my time as a student was marked by events of a similar magnitude, but in a very different direction. When I was your age, the Berlin Wall fell, leading to a long period of liberalization of the movement of goods, capital, and people, leading to a peace dividend. C'était une époque d'optimisme, d'espoir.
It was a time of optimism and hope and of promise. This dynamic was particularly in Canada's favor. Our enviable geography gave us access to the broadest and most dynamic of economies, and it kept us at bay from the majority of wars and conflicts that took place.
So, because of these advantages, over decades our economy grew steadily, more integrated with the United States, through the Free Trade Agreement of the 1980s, the NAFTA Accord of the 1990s, and eventually USMCA agreement signed in 2018. Canada's trade increased by over 400% during that period, and our economy doubled in size. But this process, this decades-long process of an ever closer economic relationship with the United States, is now over. And as a consequence, many of our former strengths as a country former strengths more particularly as our economy, strengths based on close ties to America have become our vulnerabilities. And as a result of that, the jobs of workers in our industries most affected by the U.S. tariffs in autos, in steel, in lumber are under threat. And our businesses are holding back investments restrained by the pall of uncertainty that's hanging over all of us. Our relationship with the United States will never again be the same as it was, even though in this new world of protectionism, we have the best trade deal of any other country, and we're working to make it even better still. Now, at the same time that all of this is happening, technology is changing the way we work, live, and communicate. When I was in graduate school, the World Wide Web, as we then called it, was that was the modern term of the information superhighway, if you ever heard of that. The World Wide Web, as we then called it, was just beginning. We used pen and paper in class. We talked on the telephone to each other. And we talked about the same news stories, the same movies, the same bands. My generation was connected by wires, yours is connected by code, and yet our society today is becoming ever more disconnected. Our public square is fragmented by online echo chambers, where truth and fiction can be hard to tell apart, and where contrasting ideas tend to polarize, not persuade. Now, in the context of all this, as Canadians, we have relearned some key lessons over the course of the past year. First, we have to take care of ourselves because we can't rely on one foreign partner. We have to take care of each other because we are stronger together. And we've learned that now is not the time to be cautious because fortune favors the bold. Nous pouvons nous donner beaucoup plus que d'autres.
We can give ourselves much more than anyone else can ever take from us. We are masters of our own home. It is Canadians who will decide what happens here.
It's your future. And we are going to give it back to you. Now, to confront a more dynamic, a more competitive, a more hostile world, we must chart a new course, drawing on our many strengths as a country, relying on our values, and being inspired by our history. First, on strengths, Canada has what the world wants. Nous sommes bordés par trois océans.
We have ocean on three sides, and we are the only country to have trade agreements with each of the G7 nations. This offers businesses unequaled access to global markets.
We start with the third largest reserves of oil, the fourth largest of natural gas. We have an electricity grid that is 85% clean, and we have the vast potential to power the clean economy of the future. We possess one of the largest resources of critical minerals and rare earths. Le Canada est un chef de file.
Canada is a leader in artificial intelligence, life science, and quantum computing. Our universities are among the top universities in the world. Our scientists are amongst the most frequently cited, and we attract and train the top talent.
Has the fiscal capacity to act decisively, and we must draw on these strengths now. Our second advantage is that Canada has the values to which the world aspires. Canada has always been, and we always will be, committed to fundamental human rights, to human dignity, and to individual freedom. We are a pluralistic society. Our cities are the most diverse in the world, places where people bring the best of their cultures. We have a public square that's loud, that's diverse and free. Et les Canadiens et Canadiennes valorisent la
Canadians
collaboration et le partenariat.
value collaboration and partnership, and we are determined that we will build a lasting future. These deep values are also economic assets. It gives investors the confidence they need to build here. It gives innovators stable foundations to take risk here. And it gives the world reason to trust in Canadians as a reliable partner.
L'histoire du Canada est remplie.
Canada's history is full of adventurers, risk-takers, and builders. Over the centuries, to succeed and prosper, we have had to go farther, build faster, and dream bigger.
Il est important de se rappeler que le Canada.
It is important that we remember that Canada, before the Confederation, was an era of boldness and risk-taking.
Our country was forged by Indigenous peoples, coureurs de bois, and voyageurs who mapped this continent and built vast trading networks from coast to coast to coast before the Americans had even left St. Louis. When the Second World War ended, Canada was ambitious, determined, and united in a mission to build big things. The St. Lawrence Seaway, the Trans-Canada Highway, Expo 67, the CN Tower. Nous avons construit de nouveaux quartiers pour des
We built new neighborhoods for hundreds of thousands of veterans and their families.
De nouvelles universités pour lancer.
And we opened new universities to help them launch their careers.
On avait le sentiment d'avoir la main sur notre avenir.
There was the sense of having our hands firmly on our
We used to
future.
build things in this country. We can build again. We used to explore this country. We can chart new courses again. We used to take big, bold risks in this country. It is time to swing for the fences again. We learned a little lesson about swinging for the fences a couple nights ago, as I recall. And this is what the upcoming budget will be about: building, taking control, and winning. We will make generational investments with a plan to protect our communities, our borders, our way of life. We will build a stronger economy where everyone has a chance to get ahead. And we will empower Canadians with new opportunities, better careers, and a lower cost of living. Now, let me start with protection, because to build more of what we need, we must protect what we have. Safe communities attract people and families to put down roots, get a home, build a rewarding career, and ensure their children get a good education. So as soon as Parliament opened in the spring, we introduced the strongest legislation in Canadian history to secure our borders and crack down on gun trafficking and illegal drugs such as fentanyl. We introduced new legislation to combat the horrifying rise in hate and violent intimidation, including to protect against anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And as I shared last week, we will table legislation for stricter bail and sentencing laws. To help secure our communities, we're hiring 1,000 new RCMP personnel, and to secure our borders, we're hiring 1,000 new border services officers. As we build safer streets and stronger borders, we also must reinforce our sovereignty in that more dangerous and divided world. And that's why Canada's new government is undertaking the largest increase in defense spending in a generation, or in generations to be more precise. And we're forging new partnerships with allies, such as the European Union, to strengthen our shared security. Parce que vous méritez un foyer.
Because you deserve a safe home. Because you deserve to feel safe.
Parce que nous défendrons la
because we
souveraineté
will
du Canada.
defend Canada's
Et parce qu'il
sovereignty.
n'y a pas de prospérité sans.
And because there is no prosperity without it.
But look, protection is not enough. We have to build, and our plan to build, first and foremost, is here at home so we can take control of our future and, as I said, give you back yours. In the last 6 months, we've worked to create the right conditions to get big things built faster. At the end of June, we passed the One Canadian Economy Act to remove federal barriers to internal trade and to fast-track the approval of nation-building projects. In August, we opened the Major Projects Office, which serves as a single point of contact to get those nation-building projects built faster. Des projets qui vont connecter, vont diversifier.
Projects that will connect, diversify, and push us forward. Projects that will lead to new partnerships across the globe. Projects that will create hundreds of thousands of well-paid jobs. Good unionized jobs for Canadian workers.
Now, last month, we announced the first tranche, the first group of these major projects, with over $60 billion of investments in nuclear power, in LNG, in carbon capture, in critical minerals, and in new trade corridors. And we outlined strategies from offshore wind to high-speed rail and a sovereign cloud to drive hundreds of billions in further investment, all while creating the conditions for a better connected, more productive, and more ambitious country. And the thing is, we are just getting started. Our next tranche of nation-building projects will be announced by the Grey Cup, after the World Series, but by the Grey Cup. Yeah. And at the core of our strategy will be to catalyze unprecedented investments in Canada over the next 5 years. That's what's going to come above and beyond these projects. Parce que nous nous concentrons aussi sur la construction.
Because we are also focusing on the construction of millions of new housing units. This will strengthen our communities. Building faster, using Canadian technology, Canadian workers, Canadian lumber, and Canadian steel. Building homes that Canadians can actually afford.
We launched Build Canada Homes here in Ottawa to help double the pace of housing construction within a decade using new factory technology, cutting building times by 50%, reducing costs by 20%, and lowering emissions by 20%. Now, it's not just what we build, it's also how we build. We will build inclusively in full partnership with Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis every step of the way. We will build in solidarity with workers, creating good union jobs. And Budget 2025 will introduce our climate competitiveness strategy. With a focus on results over objectives, on investments over prohibition, we will build sustainably. Le budget va contenir une nouvelle stratégie.
The budget will contain a new strategy to build sustainably and competitively for Canada's future. We will focus on results rather than on goals, on investments rather than on prohibitions. We will build sustainably, focusing on energy, transportation, housing, and low-carbon emissions manufacturing to strengthen our competitiveness. Bringing emissions down is not only a moral duty, it is also an economic requirement.
Our strategy will recognize that in today's global economy, we have to build sustainably. It's not just a moral duty, it's also an economic imperative. It is a moral duty, but it's an economic imperative. Now, above all, we will build Canadian. The new security threats the world is bringing to our shores means we're making the biggest investments in our military in generations. But up until now, more than 70 cents of every dollar of military spending, military capital expending by our government goes to the United States. With our new Defense Investment Agency, we will make sure we build more of our security and defense capabilities here at home, creating new careers in aerospace and shipbuilding and cyber and AI for Canadian engineers, technicians, and scientists. It's the same thing in steel. Consider that while 80% of the steel that Europe buys is manufactured in Europe, 75% of the steel that the U.S. buys is manufactured in the U.S. Only 40% of the steel that we use is made here. That doesn't make sense. Not when we have the people, the resources, and the companies to build right here in Canada. So our upcoming budget will move forward with our Buy Canadian policy, prioritizing Canadian steel, aluminum, lumber, manufactured good, and technology for Canadian projects. And with new orders for homes, infrastructure, and defense equipment becoming orders for Canadian suppliers. We will be our own best customer. So the welder who's working on a contract in St. John's can get a full-time job. Et pour qu'un ingénieur de l'Université
and so that our
d'Ottawa
engineers from the University of Ottawa have a high-quality career that is waiting for them here in Canada.
Our partners around the world are already taking note of new Canadian ambition. Last month, we signed a historic free trade deal with Indonesia, the world's fourth largest country by population. We've just signed foundational agreements with the United Arab Emirates in AI and with the EU in defense and trade and with Germany in critical minerals. We're re-engaging with global giants India and China while we deepen our partnerships with our traditional allies. And to build on this momentum, I'm going to put it in context. Our goal for Canada is to double our non-U.S. exports over the course of the next decade, generating more than $300 billion more in trade, and that's new orders for Canadian resources, technologies, and expertise. Now, you spoke of protection and building, you move to empowering. Each of you in this room and in the overflow room, each of you is here to get an education that you need to go out and build the future that you want. To be empowered with a better shot at the life you want for yourself and your family. We will keep building a country where more people have more of those opportunities. Nous continuerons de soutenir les plus vulnérables.
We will continue to support the most vulnerable and to offer respite to those who might have difficulty making ends meet. We will build a country where life is affordable. That is the third objective of our plan, to give all Canadians the means to succeed.
So, we start by lowering costs with programs and services that provide strong foundations for a good life. So the first thing that we did, the absolute first thing we did after the election was to cut taxes for all Canadians who pay tax, delivering tax savings for more than 22 million Canadians. We cut taxes to reduce the cost of housing for first-time homebuyers, some of whom I hope are in this room, immediately making the goal of home ownership a reality for more Canadians with young families. All of the big projects that we're driving forward, from new housing and new ports and clean energy, will create high-paying careers, many of them union careers here in Canada. It will be a great time to be in the trades. But as well, in the budget, we will unlock new apprenticeships, new skills training programs, and a new talent strategy for the next generation of scientists and innovators who will build our country. And as we build new industries and create new markets, you will be equipped with the skills you need to succeed with those opportunities. Because when Canadians empower each other, everyone benefits, and Canada prospers. Pour saisir ce moment. Vas-y. Pour saisir ce moment charnière.
To seize this key moment, we need to make difficult decisions. We will have to transform how government works. We will have to spend less so that Canadians can invest more. We will build our country and create the best careers.
The upcoming budget will balance the operating deficit in 3 years by reducing wasteful government spending and doing more with less. So the fact is that federal spending has been growing over the course of the last decade by more than 7% year over year. We've been spending faster than our economy was growing. So we have to change that, and our government is changing that. As one example, we just completed a 60-day red tape review that identified nearly 500 new ways to streamline government services, cut duplication, and reduce costs. And when we saw that Canada Post was losing $10 million a day, Madam President, would you like to have $10 million a day? Imagine what you could do for the university with $10 million a day. Canada Post losing $10 million a day. We made responsible choices. But the fact is, even with such efficiencies and with better management, we will have to do less of some of the things that we want to do so we can do more of what we must do to build a bigger and better Canada. Ce budget va protéger les programmes
This budget will protect essential programs that give each and every Canadian a real chance of moving forward. We will protect the Canadian dental care plan. This plan has allowed 5 million Canadians to have access to affordable dental care. And we will also make the National School Food Program a permanent program. This provides 400,000 children healthy meals every day.
We will protect the National Child Care Program for the over 900,000 children who are getting a strong start that they deserve, and for their parents who no longer have to choose between raising a family and keeping their careers. And as well, our budget will also bring in automatic federal benefits so that the millions of low-income Canadians who aren't part of the system can get the support that they need. Now, we need to be clear-eyed about where we stand today so we can build for tomorrow. Let me give the current economic context. I'm channeling my old central banker days here. Look, the situation in Canada now, the actual situation, is that the rate of inflation has come down. It's come down sharply. But it's also the case that the cost of living is still far too high. It's also the situation in Canada right now that we're building a lot more homes. Housing starts are up this year. And affordability of those houses are improving. But it's still challenging. We need to build many, many more homes, and we need to build them a lot faster. This government is getting immigration under control, with asylum claims down by 1/3 and new temporary foreign workers down by more than 70% this year. To match immigration levels with our needs and our capacity to welcome them, this budget will include Canada's new immigration plan to do better for newcomers and for everyone. It's also the fact that in this economy, we are creating jobs as a whole across it. And it is a fact that we are forecast to be the second fastest growing economy in the G7 over the course of the next 2 years. Even though some critical sectors, I mentioned earlier, autos, steel, lumber, forest products, aluminum, and some regions are facing big, big pressures. So the facts are that at present, despite everything, despite these big changes, our economy is holding up. But it's equally true that if we don't act now, these pressures will only grow. And more fundamentally, our goal is not just to do reasonably well, but to grow stronger than the rest of the G7. And as we work to do so, I want to make this promise to Canadians. I will always be straight about the challenges that we face and the choices that we must make. And to be clear, we won't transform our economy easily or in a few months. It will take some sacrifices, and it will take some time. Our government will work relentlessly to cut waste and drive efficiencies. And when we have to make difficult choices, we will be thoughtful, we'll be transparent, we'll be fair. We will work collaboratively with our colleagues across the aisle to build, protect, and empower Canadians. We won't play games. We won't waste time. And we won't hold back. We will do what it takes. We will play to win. We will bet on Canada and all Canadians. Je fais cette promesse aux Canadiens.
I make this promise to Canadians. I will always be forthright about the challenges that we need to overcome and the choices that we'll have to make. We will not transform our economy easily, nor in just a few months. It will require sacrifices, and that will take time. Our government will work tirelessly to eliminate waste and improve efficiencies. And when we do have to make difficult choices, we will do so upon reflection and with transparency. We will work in collaboration with our colleagues from all parties to build and protect and give Canadians more power. We will not play games. And we will not waste any time. We will not hold back. We will do everything needed to win by betting on Canada and Canadians. It's our future, your country, and we will give you control.
And to finish, because we're all in this together, I ask you to get involved. The fact you're here this evening, we do many other things, shows that you're interested in being involved. Get involved. Look out for each other. Look after each other. I know from the history that I read in university and the history that I've lived since graduating that fortune truly does favor the bold. And the hinge of fate will turn on what Canada does right now. We're going to have to change how we do some things. But we will never change who we are. This moment has revealed, yes, the limits to our economic independence. Limits that we must tackle head on, and we will. But more importantly, what it's revealed is a nation that's more determined, generous, hardworking, compassionate, and ambitious than any other on earth. We are Canada strong, Canada fort. Vive le Canada.
Prime Minister Mark Carney at the University of Ottawa there, shaking hands with one of the local members of Parliament on the Liberal side, Mona Forche. The audience filled with students and some others, I think some of their professors and other invited guests. The speech ran about 30 minutes long and covered a lot of very familiar ground around the state of the economy as the Prime Minister sees it and his vision heading into a budget that is about 2 weeks away. We'll keep our eye on the room there and see if there's any more action. But right now, for some reaction to the content of that speech, I want to bring back our political analysts, Scott Reed, James Moore, and Kathleen Monk, who have all been listening in for the duration of that speech. Scott, we were talking in advance about kind of what objectives from a strategic perspective as well as a content perspective that the Prime Minister might have. How do you think the delivery of that speech matched up to what you thought it should be about?
Imperfect. Look, it showcased the Prime Minister's comfort and ease when it comes to articulating geopolitical issues, macroeconomic issues, the big forces that are shaping and reshaping our world right now, his easy command of policy matters, his comfort. But if the purpose of the speech was to tell us what we need to know unmistakably about the budget, what its anchoring priorities are, the key takeaways from the budget that will come down on November 4th, I'm not certain I understood what he was trying to tell us. I mean, is it about doubling trade to countries other than the United States over the course of the next decade? That's what the budget's about. Is it about balancing an operating deficit, which is a brand new concept that wasn't defined in the speech and is not defined in in any objective sense, and why that matters and how that's an engine for growth. It was in front of a group of students. We were told this was going to be about on a generational appeal. I didn't hear anything that seemed in the most narrow sense, the most sort of tactical sense, targeted toward that audience. So I still don't know, is this budget going to be about austerity, about sacrifices? Is it about dealing with Trump and trade? Is it going to be dealing with growth? I am not crystal clear on what the Prime Minister wanted us to understand about the budget that's coming, and he took 30 minutes to not tell me it.
James, what do you think?
Yeah, there was an apex moment in the speech that was frankly missing. I agree with Scott. Like there's a moment in the speech where there's a window after the setup. You connect with the students where you say, and I want Canadians to know that there's a very important budget coming up in 2 weeks. And one fundamental thing that I want you to understand about this budget is that we are going to, and it didn't happen. So I think he kind of missed a window there. I think stylistically it was fine. It might have been a better book than a movie, but I think to Scott's point, like it sort of did showcase his, the breadth of his capacity and the reputational equity that he has based on his resume and so on and so forth. But if he's going to make an argument about how Canada is going to open up our markets with the world and look at all the things that we've done, and he points to a mineral deal with Germany and a letter of intent to have an MOU with the UAE on AI, that's pretty thin stuff. On the economic side, there were two things that I thought were interesting. One was where he said, we're going to balance the operational budget of the government within the next 3 years. A fun historic fact, Brian Mulroney also balanced the operational budget of the federal government while he was Prime Minister, but it didn't matter because everything else was spun so out of control that it led to a deficit crisis that resulted in the 1995 budget under Prime Minister Chrétien Martin that got us back towards a balanced trajectory in the 1990s. So balancing the operational point doesn't really deal with the macro fiscal situation that we're in. We have a real structural deficit problem. But a smaller bit in this piece that I thought was interesting, though, in the speech was where he bragged about confronting the Canada Post issue and confronting a $10 million per day deficit that Canada Post was dealing with and saying, we did that because it was necessary and that's what tough leadership looks like. My phrasing, not his. That's a little bit of red meat to New Democrats and a little bit of red meat to progressive and union voters out there that may not like what he did on that front. But I thought that was interesting that he thought that was a point to brag on in terms of his capacity to rationalize federal spending.
Yeah, I think just jumping off what both James and Scott said, I think like if you were going into the speech thinking, I want people to walk away, because yes, you're speaking to the audience there, but you've got a national audience on multiple national networks as well. Like, this is my chance to speak directly to Canadians at a time where they're not used to hearing from me, and I want them to walk away thinking X. Like, I am not sure what the X is.
Yeah, and so he did have that setup moment where he said, the next budget is going to be about, and he said it's about building, taking control, and winning. But he didn't define what that is. In fact, maybe if you were to take away something in trying to get into the mind of the speechwriter, what they were trying to do was really try to say, hey, there's going to have to be some sacrifices, and this is going to take some time. So he was trying to almost like precondition Canadians. But what was the failure, I think, tonight, and I don't want to be too hard on it, but I think the failure really is we have auto workers out there who are, realizing that they're waking up to maybe historic job losses, right?
Every day.
We have every day new companies announcing, retractions from Canada. We have steel workers who've been pounded for months now, lumber workers who've been pounded for months who are really, really hurting. We have an affordability crisis where folks can't even pay for rent, never mind, the price of groceries. And he really didn't touch on that. And in fact, the venue did seem a little bit strange because he spoke about the housing affordability measures that he has made for first-time buyers, and then looked at the room of students in the room and said, hopefully some of you are in there. And I can pretty much guarantee that those students who are in the room pretty much don't have the money to scrape together to be a first-time home buyer. And, in terms of the union crowd, James mentioned this, there was a play to the apprenticeship money that obviously is going to come in the budget, and that it's a good time to be in the skills trades. But that's hard. It's a hard message to accept right now. If you're an electrical worker who is trying to be working on some of these plants to build the kind of manufacturing that we're hoping to go forward with. So, best case scenario that the media to kind of take away that kind of spend less, do more with less message, and that this is really like a belt tightening exercise that Carney was trying to put out tonight to kind of be where we need to kind of really all of us take our lumps when the budget comes out in 2 weeks.
Okay, I'm going to take a quick commercial break. We've got lots more coverage of the Prime Minister's address, including a check-in with Michael Couture, who was in the room and talking to people who were there listening. We're back in a moment with more special coverage right here on CTV News Channel.
Actions may speak louder than words.
Control and winning.
That's Prime Minister Mark Carney just moments ago at the University of Ottawa delivering a pre-budget address of sorts. My colleague, senior political correspondent Michael Couture, was there for this speech. He's been speaking to members of the crowd both before and I think after. Mike, what are you hearing from people there about how the speech was received?
Yeah, I made sure to speak to the people who I spoke to before Vassy to sort of get their expectations, and then afterwards to see if they were met. Now, 2 members of the Young Liberals here at University of Ottawa did feel like it met the moment. They felt like there were a couple of nuggets in there that they hadn't really known before about the budget, and they were happy to hear about it, notably about immigration, but a number of other things that they felt was really sort of what they wanted to hear and what they were anticipating. Then there was that student of criminology who was a little disappointed to hear about what they're going to do with the illegal border crossings, but also felt like that were times that he was speaking to students and other times where he didn't really sort of feel the connection in the room. I also spoke to somebody in the Prime Minister's entourage who thought it went very, very well. They said that they thought that there were a number of applause points that they were very happy about. So certainly it sounds like the Prime Minister's office feels like this is mission accomplished, Vassy. And it is interesting to sort of hear a lot of these students talk about it and talk about what they appreciated in it, but also how they were talking earlier about how they want more of this. They want more politicians to come and speak to them, but at the same time, a number of them didn't feel like this speech was the one that was sort of meeting them on their level. Yes, they thought that it was a thorough speech, but maybe not one that addressed everything that they are thinking about right now, cost of living and the difficulty that they will have emerging from university. Even though Mark Carney went to great pains to try and talk about when he was university versus when they were in university, talking about the World Wide Web, which I think maybe some of these students have heard from their parents, but certainly not something that they're is something in their daily life and or that they have been concerned about. I think it was interesting in the way he tried to relate to them in the room. Interesting as well, Vassy, that after he finished in that big room, he went to both of the overflow rooms that they had set up here at the university where people were watching on screens, went in, said a few words, thanked them for coming, and then exited out of the building. So it sounds like, at least from their perspective, from the Prime Minister's office perspective, that this did land, and they hope that this will build on something, certainly.
And just really quickly before I let you go, can you remind us of what they had hoped would land? Like what exactly was the strategic objective of this address from their perspective?
Yeah, they really wanted to make sure they were speaking to this cohort of the voting population, the 18 to 24-year-olds. Going into this, they had said, look, we've spoken to industry, we've spoken to people in the trades, we've spoken to a great number of the population, a great number of those cohorts, and they really want to make sure that they're talking to younger voters and saying that they feel what the pains that they're going through, and they're hoping to address them and try to help them understand that there is something in this budget for them and that the country is going in the right direction, something that I think the Liberals will even admit that they haven't done a lot of in terms of trying to connect with young people. We know that the Conservatives, as Nick Nanos had mentioned earlier in the broadcast, really did a better job of connecting, and I heard that from a number of the students here as well. So I think for people, for the Prime Minister's office, they think that this was a job well done in at least coming to give this speech to people on campus.
Okay, Mike, I'll leave it there. Appreciate your reporting tonight very much. Thank you. Michael Couture is our senior political correspondent here at CTV News. I'll take one more quick commercial break. On the other end of that break, more special coverage and analysis of the Prime Minister's pre-budget address. Back in a moment.
Mount Jarrow, Mount Jarrow. Wanna know if it's right for me. Mount Jarrow. Mount Jarrow. Mount Jarrow.
Ask your doctor if Mount Jarrow is right for you.
Nasal congestion is tough. Try Hydrosense for fast-acting relief at the site of nasal congestion with 100% naturally sourced seawater. Hydrosense. Breathe better with our Science of the Sea.
Hi, I'm Darcy Walker, president of The Brick. Our customers are the heart and soul of our company, so we're bringing you our best finance offer of the year.
The President's Sale. Take 6 years to pay.
and doing more with less. So the fact is that federal spending has been growing over the course of the last decade by more than 7% year over year. We've been spending faster than our economy was growing. So we have to change that, and our government is changing that.
Prime Minister Mark Carney just moments ago at the University of Ottawa delivering a pre-budget address for about 30 minutes. That's just a snippet, part of what he said. I'm here with Scott Reid, James Moore, and Kathleen Monk, who listened to the entirety of the speech and have been kind enough to lend us their analysis throughout the evening. Scott, if you were to leave that speech and the Prime Minister were to say, what do I need to do over the next 2 weeks to make sure that this budget is a political success for our party, what would you tell him?
Well, they got to dig deeper, and they have to tell people what he didn't tell them tonight, which is what is this budget going to be about, and how does that improve their life and make them more confident about a very perilous time. There's a speech like this has only one job. It's a thermometer speech. It's intended to tell us how to measure the budget. What's good, what's bad, what's hot, what's cold. It's to set out that measurement. And I don't really think it did that. And I don't want to be overly harsh, but why call people together to give this speech unless it is to do that? And I don't think he invited Canadians to say, here's the thing I really want to do, but I think that really matters and why it ought to matter to you. This is the basis upon which I want you to judge this, my first budget, at this most critical time as Donald Trump has turned his cannons on our economy. And I think the hardest news out of this probably is the clip that you just showed. We're going to balance the operating deficit over the next 3 years. But again, we don't know what the operating deficit is. We don't know what their definition is. And it drives us to, therefore, a definition of the budget that is based around fiscal performance. Is that really what he wants Canadians to be focused on? Is that the sum total? Is that the most important thing? So even by its own standards, I didn't really understand the test it was trying to set for Canadians about this budget, the invitation it wanted to make to Canadians as to how to judge this budget. That's got to be fixed in the next 10 days.
I was actually a little bit surprised at the degree to which there was talk around spending constraints, for example, James, and other things throughout peppered throughout the speech about sort of, compare and contrast what we are planning to do on that versus the previous government, only because they've moved so far away from it in the last month. Like, they did stop talking about austerity or anything that even came close to it. And tonight there was more about that and potential sacrifices than I would have guessed they had signaled previously. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, there were a few tripwires in there, right, that may be triggered by opposition parties. But certainly there are things in there that you wouldn't think a Liberal Prime Minister would brag about. Bragging about putting a cap on the immigration inflows into the country. Bragging about getting rid of the carbon tax, even though he didn't use the word carbon tax or even consumer carbon tax. He just talked about the tax relief they did in the early part of the government. Bragging about getting to an operational balanced budget, but at least the words balanced budget were in there, even though it's a small piece of the larger fiscal framework of the government of Canada. So there were something, bragging about, as I said before, about confronting the meltdown of the business model of Canada Post. So he put some red meat in there, and I think there's, plenty of stuff in there that he also talked about protecting, the 900,000 kids who are benefiting from some of the social programs the government has put in place. So he didn't quite challenge the opposition parties to vote against it or face an election campaign, but I think he put some rhetoric in there and some language in there that would lead the opposition parties to have to sort of think twice that, if you're a conservative, do you want to be against a prime minister who's committed to balancing the operational part of the budget anyway and cracking down on immigration inflows and doing some stuff on bail reform and doing, there's some stuff in there that he can say, look, the Conservatives aren't serious. They just want to play politics. They don't want to support our efforts. And then I think there's an equivalent narrative on the New Democrat side. But it wasn't quite as, I think to Scott's point, it wasn't quite as, high noon, like get on board or get out of the way kind of a moment. When I leave, my office here after this to head out, my neighbor asks me, what was the speech about? I'm going to say, he's done a bunch of stuff. He's going to do a bunch more stuff. Stand by, because I don't quite know yet. And I think that's kind of where we are. It wasn't a bad speech, but nothing really dramatic to sort of point to.
Last word to you, Kathleen.
Yeah, I think that if Canadians hired Prime Minister Carney on April 29th because he projected some kind of competence and some calmness, he certainly reiterated that tonight. He said, you know, we've got to be clear-eyed about the kind of hinge moment that we are in right now. And I think that he did actually signal something to progressives. As James mentioned, not only just the child care, but he said he's keeping dental care. He's expanding, actually, another bit of news, he will expand the school lunch program. I mean, these are things that progressives want to see in there. But the question is, like, can he double down if, as I said in the beginning before he spoke, that this is the first report card that we're getting on the Carney government. If this speech tonight is the progress moment, like how is he doing in the progress report card, he needs to do a lot more work. He needs to have detail in that speech on November 4th. He needs to expand how he's going to do reskilling, retraining these workers that are now facing job loss.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Thanks, all three of you, for making the time throughout the evening and sticking with us for such a long period. Scott Reed, James Moore, and Kathleen Monk. My thanks also to my colleague Michael Couture, who was on scene for us, and of course, Nick Nanos for his insight. We're going to have lots more coverage of the speech and reaction to it throughout the evening on CTV here. I'm going to leave our special coverage there. Thanks for watching.
I'm a simple man. Friends, family, and hockey. But now that I'm in my 50s, sometimes I feel like I don't have a lot of choices.